Hi, my name is Madeline Maddie Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story online or anywhere, really, but I think it's time. You see, my life didn't start like most people's imagine when they think of success. In fact, at one point, my parents called me a complete failure. And it all started the day I dropped out of college. I can still remember that evening as if it happened yesterday. I was sitting in our cramped living room, my textbooks spread across the coffee table, half-finished assignments scattered like little monuments of my impending doom. My dad, Robert, sat in his recliner, eyes fixed on the evening news, while my mom, Karen, hovered near the doorway, arms crossed. "Madeline," my mom said, her voice sharp but low, like a blade just barely cutting through the air. "You can't just quit. You're throwing your future away." "I know, Mom," I whispered, barely meeting her eyes. "But I can't do it. I've tried. I can't keep pretending this is working for me." My dad finally looked up, and his expression was worse than I remembered. The disappointment in his eyes wasn't subtle. It was like I'd personally betrayed him, shamed him. "Failure doesn't even begin to describe what this is, Maddie," he said, his tone low and controlled. "You're going to ruin your life." That hit me harder than any insult, harder than any fight we'd ever had. I wanted to scream, to run, to make him understand that college wasn't the only way, but instead, I just sat there, heart hammering in my chest, feeling smaller than I ever had. I packed my things that night. My dorm, my books, my laptop, I left it all behind. The next morning, I walked out of that campus with nothing but a duffel bag and a head full of dreams nobody seemed to believe in. For years after, I felt like my parents were the only judges that mattered. Every holiday, every family dinner, every phone call reminded me of the word they'd both etched into my heart: failure. They never missed a chance to bring it up. "You know, some of your classmates are already getting their dream jobs," my mom would say, her smile tight, like she was trying to pass off a criticism as encouragement. I stopped going home. I stopped calling. I stopped letting them see that the words hurt me, that they haunted me every time I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But here's the thing about being called a failure: you can either let it define you, or you can use it. And at 21, after bouncing from dead-end jobs and living in a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a leaking sink, I realized I had to do something. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for life to approve of me. I had to create my own success, even if nobody believed in me. I started small. A website. An idea I barely even understood fully. I spent nights coding, learning about marketing, networking, and pitching my little dream to anyone who would listen. Most people laughed. Most people said I was crazy. Most people were my parents' voice in my head. But slowly, things started to click. I found people who believed in me: investors, friends, mentors, and I learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the people who claim to love you the most can also be the ones who doubt you the most. Fast forward 5 years. My startup, which I had poured every ounce of energy, hope, and sleepless night into, was starting to gain traction. The first small investment turned into a bigger one, then another, and soon I had a team, a product, and a growing user base. I hadn't thought about my parents in a while, not really. They were like a shadow in my past, a reminder of what I didn't want to become. But one evening, everything changed. I was doing a routine video interview with a tech journalist. I'd expected maybe a small article, maybe a feature in a minor business magazine. What I got instead was televised. Live, and there they were, my parents, sitting in their living room, eyes glued to the TV, mouths slightly open as they watched me talk about my company, the startup I founded from scratch, the one now valued at millions. Their favorite words of my life: failure, disappointment, waste, hung ironically in the silence of that moment. I won't lie, part of me wanted to look straight into the camera and say, "You called me a failure. Look at me now." But I didn't. I smiled politely, answered the questions with charm, and let my work speak for itself. Revenge doesn't have to scream, it can be quiet, elegant, and unavoidable. That night, I went to bed in my apartment, tiny, cluttered, but mine, and for the first time in years, I slept without guilt, without fear, without the crushing weight of their words. I had finally proven something, not just to them, but to myself. I never realized how lonely ambition could be until I was sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment at 2 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups, crumpled notes, and a laptop that seemed to mock me with its blinking cursor. I was 22, broke, and utterly terrified that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by dropping out of college. I remember thinking, maybe my parents were right. Maybe I am a failure, and then I laughed at myself. Not the good, confident laugh, but the one that comes out of desperation. Because if I believed that, if I let that fear take root, I'd never even try. I tried that I had no investors. No connections. No one willing to bet on a 22-year-old dropout with a crazy idea about software that could help small businesses automate inventory management. I coded everything myself, slept in a chair more than a bed, and survived on instant noodles and the occasional frozen pizza. My friends drifted away. They didn't understand why I spent hours at the laptop instead of partying or hanging out. And honestly, I didn't understand myself either. Then came Jason. He was 25, charming, and seemed to have all the right connections. We met at a tech meetup, and he was instantly interested in my project, or so I thought. "You have potential, Maddie," he said, leaning back in his chair at a coffee shop downtown. "But you need funding, and you can't do that alone. I can help you. I have investors who might bite." I was cautious but desperate. I nodded eagerly, letting hope push me past the part of my brain screaming don't trust him. For weeks, we worked together. He seemed brilliant, always full of ideas and energy, and he treated me like a partner rather than some naive girl chasing a pipe dream. Slowly, I began to trust him. Maybe too much. Then the betrayal came. One evening, I got a call from an investor, someone I thought we'd both pitched to successfully. The voice on the other end was cold, polite, but unmistakably wary. "Ms. Carter," he said, "we're no longer interested in funding your startup. Someone else presented the same concept, and we've decided to move forward with them instead." My chest sank. My stomach turned. "Someone else?" I asked, voice trembling. "Who?" There was a pause. "I'm afraid I can't disclose that, but we appreciated your time." Click. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking. And then it hit me, Jason. He had stolen my idea, presented it as his own, and left me in the dust. All those late nights, all the trust one had given him, betrayed. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Instead, I felt a fire ignite in my chest. Anger, yes, but also determination. If he thought he could stop me, he was dead wrong. I spent the next 3 months rebuilding, coding every night until my fingers bled, refining the idea, and making it better than it had ever been. It wasn't easy. I lost friends, missed birthdays, and even started to feel the sting of loneliness that comes from devoting yourself entirely to a dream. But I refused to give up. And slowly, things started turning around. A small investor, one I had almost ignored because he didn't seem important, agreed to meet. I presented my improved concept, my pitch sharper than ever. He smiled, nodded, and said, "I like your grit. Let's do this." That deal led to another, then another. By the time I was 24, I had a small team of brilliant, loyal people who believed in me and my vision. We worked from a cramped co-working space downtown, but it felt like a palace compared to the despair I had lived through. Even then, though, the memory of Jason lingered. Every time we reached a milestone, part of me wanted to rub it in, to show him I'd survived, thrived, and succeeded despite his betrayal. But I didn't. I let my work speak, because revenge is sweeter when it's quiet and unstoppable. Through it all, I still thought about my parents. Not often, they weren't part of my life anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they'd see me now, if they'd understand that dropping out wasn't the end, but the beginning. The moment came sooner than I expected. One Friday evening, we were doing a live interview for a local news station. I was nervous, of course. My voice trembled slightly as I talked about the startup, our growth, and the vision for the future. But as the camera rolled, I noticed the live feed showing viewers at home, and I saw a familiar face in the crowd, or rather, on the screen. It was them. My parents. Sitting on their couch, staring in disbelief as I spoke. I froze for a second, heart pounding. I could see it in their expressions, the shock, the disbelief, the flicker of regret. But I didn't falter. I smiled, spoke confidently, and let every word remind myself that I had made it. I had created something from nothing, from rejection, from betrayal, and that's when it hit me. The real victory wasn't just seeing their faces on TV, it was knowing that I hadn't needed their approval to succeed. I had done it on my own. By the time I turned 26, my life had completely transformed. The startup I had built from scratch, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every betrayal, had grown into something beyond my wildest dreams. Investors were now competing to get a piece of it. Our software was used nationwide, and the team that had once huddled in a tiny co-working space now operated in a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city skyline. But with success came something I hadn't anticipated: the scrutiny. Journalists called, tech blogs wrote profiles, and suddenly, my story was out there for anyone to see. And, of course, that included my parents. I didn't know how to feel when I first saw them watching an interview I did for a national business channel. Their living room, as I later learned, was filled with my mother's knitting still in her lap and my father's evening paper forgotten on the coffee table. Their faces were frozen in disbelief. My mom's mouth was slightly open, her hand gripping the arm of the couch, while my dad's eyes darted between the screen and his hands, like he was trying to reconcile the image of me, his failure, with the woman speaking confidently about millions in funding and a growing empire. That I almost laughed. But I didn't. I smiled at the camera, answered questions with grace, and allowed my work to speak louder than any words of revenge I could have shouted. It was enough. A week later, my phone rang. My mom, Maddie, can we come see you? Her voice was tentative, almost fragile, and I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to let the past remain in the shadows. But another part, deeper, more human, wanted closure. Of course, I said. Come by next weekend. When they arrived, I felt a swirl of emotions: nervousness, anger, longing, pride. They looked older. Harsher lines in their faces, eyes slightly sunken. But their expressions softened when they saw me. My dad cleared his throat, probably trying to figure out what to say. Maddie, he began, voice thick. We didn't realize. You didn't believe in me, I interrupted gently, holding up a hand. I know. There was silence. My mom swallowed hard, eyes glistening. We thought dropping out was the end of everything for you, she admitted. We didn't see that you'd find your own path. I took a deep breath. I didn't need your belief. I needed my own. And I found it. That's the difference. They looked at me, really looked, for the first time in years. And I realized that while their approval had hurt me, or rather, the lack of it, the real triumph wasn't making them acknowledge me. The real triumph was living my life authentically, unapologetically, and successfully, despite their doubts. We sat together that evening, eating takeout in my office conference room, my favorite guilty pleasure, fried chicken from a tiny shop around the corner, talking about everything and nothing. They asked about my team, my journey, the challenges, and I answered honestly, without holding back. I told them about Jason, about the sleepless nights, about the moments I thought I might fail. And I could see, in their eyes, a mix of pride and regret. It was cathartic. Not because I wanted to rub my success in their faces, but because I finally felt free. Free from the shadows of their expectations, free from the whispers of failure in my head. I had turned every doubt, every criticism, every betrayal into fuel. By the end of the night, as they left my office, my mother hugged me tightly. You've made us proud, Maddie. Truly proud. I smiled, hugged her back, and whispered, it's taken me a long time to make myself proud. But now I am. And as I closed the door behind them, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about humiliation or confrontation. Revenge is the quiet, undeniable proof that you can rise above the people who doubted you. That you can create a life so full, so successful, that no words of judgment can touch it. That night, I walked through my office, past the city lights reflecting on the glass walls, and finally allowed myself to feel the weight lift off my shoulders. I had not only survived, I had thrived. And the girl who once sat on the floor of a tiny apartment, terrified of being a failure, was now a woman whose success could not be denied. It's strange, looking back now. 10 years ago, I was sitting on the floor of a tiny apartment, staring at a blinking cursor, convinced that dropping out of college meant the end of my life. 10 years ago, the words failure and disappointment were tattooed into my soul by the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Now, I live in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, with a team that feels more like family than colleagues. My startup isn't just successful, it's a recognized brand, a product that makes life easier for thousands of businesses. We've expanded internationally, and every day, I wake up excited to keep building, innovating, and creating. But more than the money, more than the fame, more than the satisfaction of proving my parents wrong, I value the lessons I learned along the way. That I learned that failure isn't what people say it is. Failure isn't a label someone puts on you. Failure is only real when you give up. I learned that betrayal, like the kind Jason delivered, hurts like hell, but it also sharpens your instincts and teaches you resilience. I learned that the people who doubt you, even the ones closest to you, do not define your worth. You do. I also learned something unexpected: forgiveness isn't weakness. Seeing my parents again, feeling their pride, their regret, their love finally breaking through the wall of judgment, they didn't deserve the bitterness I had carried for years. But letting go of that bitterness freed me more than anything else ever could. I sometimes think about that moment when they watched me on television for the first time. The way their faces froze in shock. The way my mother's knitting fell from her lap. The silence that spoke louder than any words. I could have screamed at them, told them exactly how I felt, reminded them of every word they ever said. But I didn't need to. My life was my answer. My success was my revenge. And that, I realized, is the most elegant kind of justice. Even now, people ask me if I ever resent them for calling me a failure, for doubting me, for letting me go. And yes, sometimes I do. But that resentment is fleeting, because I've learned to focus on the things I can control: my choices, my work, my heart. I've learned that living fully, authentically, and courageously is the ultimate triumph. Sometimes I visit college campuses again, not to relive the past, but to see young people chasing dreams, struggling under pressure, doubting themselves. And I smile quietly, remembering the girl I once was, and I think, she made it. And you can too. I still think about Jason from time to time. He's out there, I'm sure, doing something, maybe successful, maybe not. But his shadow no longer darkens my path. My path is mine alone, built on nights of doubt turned into days of victory, built on lessons learned the hard way, built on resilience and heart. And when I look in the mirror now, I don't see a dropout, a failure, or a disappointment. I see a woman who dared to define her own destiny, who fought through every obstacle, and who rose to heights she never could have imagined. Back on that cramped living room floor, surrounded by textbooks and judgment, in the end, the best revenge, the best triumph, isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you can rise above, that you can create, that you can live a life that no one can take from you, not even the people who once called you a failure. And as I sit here, in my office overlooking the city lights, I finally feel it: peace, pride, freedom, because I am more than what anyone ever said about me. I am Maddie Carter. I am unstoppable. And this life, the life I built from nothing, is mine, fully, unapologetically, and forever.